Good evening. My name is Sadia Sindhu, and I'm the Executive Director of the University of Chicago Center for Effective Government at the Harris School of Public Policy. The Center for Effective Government was founded in 2019 with an ambitious but vital mission to strengthen democratic institutions and improve the capacity of government to solve public problems. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the last installment of the fourth annual Harris School of Public Policy Summer of Social Impact series. This series explores innovative approaches that make social impact on major policy issues facing our society, from Chicago to the world. The series showcases the vital role data and analytics play in finding solutions to help reduce inequality, strengthen our democracy, create a more sustainable environment, and address other pressing challenges of our time. Tonight, we have about 800 attendees registered, including alumni and friends, current students, members of the Civic Leadership Academy, and we're especially excited to have so many of our incoming students participating in tonight's discussion. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to go over some quick housekeeping. Tonight's discussion will be a conversation, and we welcome and encourage you all to participate. You can do so by using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And now, without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome my colleague and tonight's featured guest, Professor William Howell. William Howell is the director of the Center for Effective Government, co-host of Not Another Politics podcast, and the Sidney Stein Professor in American Politics at the University of Chicago. He is chair of the Political Science Department and holds additional appointments in the Harris School of Public Policy and the college. Professor Howell has written widely on separation of powers issues in American political institutions, especially the presidency. He's the author or co-author of 7 books, and his most recent book, Presidents, Populism, and the Crisis of Democracy, written with Terry Moe, is a topic of tonight's conversation. Professor Howell is the recipient of many academic awards, including the Legacy Award for Enduring Research on Executive Politics. He was recently inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Before coming to the University of Chicago, Professor Howell taught in the Government Department of Harvard University and the Political Science Department at the University of Wisconsin. He holds a PhD in Political Science from Stanford University and a BA from Wesleyan University. When Professor Howell is not concerned about the state of our democracy, he likes to tweet about Taco Bell. Welcome. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm glad that you got Taco Bell in there. That's important.
I felt like I should. It seemed appropriate, given the week. So this talk today at the Harris School is the first stop on your Midwest leg of your virtual book tour, and rightfully so. So I've got to ask, you're a political scientist, you're at the Harris School, you're chair of the department at the University of Chicago, and you care deeply about this field. In reflecting on the value of graduate education today in public policy, why is it important for our students to be thinking about political institutions?
So terrific question. It's a big, broad thing that we in the Harris School, the community of political economists, think a lot about. And the short answer, there's lots of long answers. Academics are good at providing long answers. I'm going to try to be succinct. The short answer is that it's not enough just to identify what good public policy is, just to identify what the optimal policy looks like. That there's a lot of work that goes into that, and that's crucial work. And we at the Harris School have got terrific folk investigating all kinds of issues, ranging from immigration policy to healthcare policy to issues involving climate change and on and on. But we've got to figure out how those policies actually get enacted and how they get implemented. And for that, we need to have an understanding of the venues in which policy is written and implemented. We have to have understandings of legislatures and executives and courts and bureaucracies in order to be impactful. So we're not interested in just kind of equipping our students with good ideas about what could be. We're interested in empowering them to get out there and make a real difference. And the political economists are really focused on those issues of institutional design because they care about how we translate ideas into actual meaningful policy change.
And you've spent a big part of your career thinking about political institutions. What motivated you to write Presidents, Populism, and the Crisis of Democracy? You and Terry Moe, I should say, your co-author.
Yeah, so Terry was my dissertation advisor at Stanford. So he's an old friend, and we've written together for many years. And separately and sometimes together, we've written a lot on separation of powers issues and presidential power, these kinds of things. And we've done so as political scientists because we want to understand the way that politics works because it's of intrinsic interest. And I'll say that the election of Donald Trump, we found that it sort of raised like profound issues that had to do with challenges to our democracy, the rise of populism within this country, and the need for institutional reform, not just in light of Trump, but in trying to make sense of the kind of the preconditions that laid the groundwork for Trump's emergence to power. We were worried about the state of our country, and we wanted to kind of speak in a full-throated way, and hopefully to a broader audience than just our immediate community of political economists and political scientists, about the way that the presidency is currently designed and its implications for the policies that we observe.
So in the book, Will, you and Terry argue that ineffective government gave rise to populism, Donald Trump, and the crisis of democracy. And the solution lies in institutional reforms that ought to make our government more effective. Before we get to the latter part of this argument, I want to spend some time thinking about populism. How do you all define populism?
So that's a good question. So, I mean, the core of a core part of our argument is that Trump is a populist, right? If you want to understand Trump, certainly what distinguishes Trump from past presidents is that it's the populism that he channels. And what we don't mean by populism is the kind of way that populism is discussed in the popular media, which is that populism is a commitment to the little guy and giving voice to those who are excluded, and expanding the franchise and providing kind of government benefits to people who are struggling. That's when political scientists, there are a lot of political scientists who've studied populism, they've devoted their lives to studying it, and that's not what they have in mind. Rather, populists distinguish themselves first by coming forward and saying, look, they speak in wholesale language and offer a sweeping critique of a political order. They talk about, the system being broken, right? The entire political regime, the entire political order being rigged and antiquated and corrupt, and they do so with such sweeping language that there's no space left for constructive reform or adaptation. And in fact, the work of a populist is not to sit to work to reform the political order so much as it is to sow anger and disaffection among the broader public about this antiquated political order. So it's about getting people to seethe. It's about continual disruption and this persistently oppositional stance that one takes to a political order. That's what populists do. And because of that, because the order is a democratic order, populism has profoundly anti-democratic tendencies. Because the populists, let me say this last thing, I'm doing the academic thing and I'm talking too long, but here we go, right? What the populist does is says, look, that wreckage over there is something that I stand apart from. I am the outsider, and so you should vest your hopes and aspirations in me. I alone can fix it. And that's profoundly dangerous. That kind of sensibility is profoundly dangerous when you're thinking about how to cultivate a healthy democracy.
So you're gonna love this. I'm gonna actually ask you to talk a little bit more about this. So much of the book tries to establish the relationship between populism and ineffective government. Can you build that out for us a bit more?
Sure. So if what populists do is they offer this sweeping, undifferentiated critique of a political order, they come out and they say, everything's broken, everything's rigged. The so-called experts in the swamp have it out for you. If that's the kind of rhetoric that they employ, the question is, under what conditions will that rhetoric resonate? Will it kind of take hold? We suggest in the book that ineffective government provides the kind of preconditions for populists to rise to power. And by ineffective government, we don't mean liberal or conservative. It's about a government that fails to solve problems that pluralities, majorities, the American public broadly expects to see the government take action on. And in the aftermath of persistent failure to meet the challenges in this era of globalization, immigration, the disruptions caused by automation, these big structural shifts to our economy, the failure of the government to meet these kinds of challenges creates real harm. And when that harm isn't adequately addressed by our government, it lays the groundwork for somebody to come forward and to say, it isn't just that the government is broken, it's that they have it out for you. And that you should, right, see this government as illegitimate and that they don't have your best interests. And again, you should vest your interests in your hopes and aspirations in me.
You spoke to this just a little bit right now, but it's not necessarily a Democratic government or a Republican government, but really just thinking about our government as a whole that has been ineffective. Can you talk about periods in which Republicans held power and Democrats held power where these issues have really persisted?
Yeah, I mean, a big part of the argument of this book is to say that they're big modern challenges. And these modern challenges have been playing out for decades, having to do with the rise of globalization and big changes in immigration flows. And again, automation and the job displacements caused by it. This isn't something that arose, last Tuesday and that we're all reeling from. These are developments that have been played out over decades. And they're developments that, to be clear, offer all kinds of benefits, all three. I mean, they're not undifferentiated because sort of threats and harm, nothing but harm to the country. In fact, they deliver a whole lot of good. There's reason to embrace all three. But there are communities that are differentially hurt by them. And the persistent failure of Democrats and Republicans alike to not just kind of speak to those harms, but to meaningfully attend to them has created all kinds of disaffection in the broader public. And it's for that reason that Donald Trump in 2016, when he runs, he benefits not just from being an outsider from politics, but being an outsider from the Republican Party. That his critique was of the political order broadly, right? The DC establishment. And he's captured the Republican Party. We're watching that this week. But he, as an outsider, was able to kind of make a set of claims that resonated precisely because there was all kinds of hurt and anxiety that communities had felt for a long time.
So I think especially in light of who occupies the Oval Office today, you and Terry argue that the answer to an effective government is in the executive branch. What is it about the presidency that makes this so? And I hope we can linger on this for a little bit, because I think this is something that's really hard for folks to grasp, because I think President Trump, when we ask this question or when this topic comes up.
Yeah, so if Trump is the threat to democracy, isn't the solution to shut him down and shut the office down that he occupies? And to be clear, there are very real threats that presidents, particularly demagogic presidents, can present to a democracy. It's not, there are reasons to fear the concentration of authority in any one individual, and to cede kind of vast powers to that individual. This is a theme of kind of American intellectual political history going back all the way to the founding. Yes, but back up a moment and say, all right, again, what is it that allowed somebody like Trump to rise to power? Well, what it was is a government that had persistently failed to solve problems, that to attend to the harm caused by globalization, the anxiety that people felt about immigration, and more broadly still, to attend to issues like climate change, like structural increases in inequality between the rich and the poor, and on and on. So then what you need to say is that if what you want to do is combat populism, not just get Trump out of office or diminish the office, but combat the threat of populism, what you then need to do is think about, how do we build a set of institutions that are more effective at solving problems? Like, what does a new political order look like that enables the government to do a better job of, say, attend to the threat of a pandemic, so that we don't have 180,000 people and counting dying because of this disease? So, and there, the presidency and presidential power, it turns out to be like really essential. It tends to be really important because presidents offer a different kind of leadership than what we observe within Congress. Presidents, by institutional design, pay more attention to the interests of the country as a whole. They pay more attention to the long-term implications of policy change. And so if you're looking for the kind of leadership we need to meet complex problems like climate change, like globalization, then we need to find ways of leveraging the presidency, and to do so, though, responsibly. So there's the fear, for sure, that's real, but there also is the promise. And if all we do is pay attention to the fear and snuff out the promise, we won't have a government that works going forward, and we will remain persistently vulnerable to the rise of populism, not just with Trump, but future populists.
Can you say a little bit more about why the president is particularly adept at attending to these issues versus, say, Congress?
Yeah, so this is something which, we write about in the book and was a theme of the previous book that Terry and I wrote, which came out in 2016, called Relic, in which we sort of distinguish legislatures from presidents. Look, if you're not going to completely upend the entire constitutional order and say, all right, let's go over to a parliamentary system, you're going to say, we got to work with what we've got. Then when it comes to problem solving, what we really have is either the presidency or Congress or some kind of combination of the two. And when it comes to Congress does a really good job at some things. It provides lots of attention to the immediate short-term interests of local constituents. And that's by design. When you have 535 voting members across two chambers in a collective decision-making body that represent 435 districts in 50 states, what you can expect them is to channel the most sort of vocal and most organized interests of the communities and the jurisdictions to which they're held accountable. And they do that one at a time. And that's fine and well when what we want to do is sort of have representation of local interests, short-term interests. But when what we want to do is, say, attend to climate change, which it requires a comprehensive, systemic, coordinated change to meet a problem that doesn't know boundaries, district boundaries, it is much more problematic. And if what you're going to do is hold out for Congress to get its act together in order to meaningfully address that issue, good luck, right? Good luck. This isn't to say that presidents always get it right. They don't. They get it wrong in all kinds of ways. And some presidents won't recognize climate change. Our current one won't recognize climate change as something that requires immediate action or forceful action. But it's our best shot.
Thanks. I also want to remind our audience that they can submit questions. I've got a few that I'm going through, but if you have questions that directly relate to what we're talking about or you're curious about, please feel free to submit them through the Q&A. So turning to the specific reforms that you and Terry get behind in this book, can you talk to me about a couple of them and then also highlight the ones that you think are most politically opportune in this environment?
Yeah, good. Yeah, okay, so what does it mean? Okay, so if we think about Congress and presidents offering different kinds of leadership, and there's a reason to try to leverage the presidency on the one hand, because they offer a different kind of leadership that we need on the one hand, but we also want to recognize that they represent a threat, right? There's the fear, there's the promise and the fear. That then when we think about institutional reform, it's that what are things that will, by leveraging the kind of leadership the president's saying to offer, will we improve the effectiveness of government on the one hand, but on the other, when a demagogue occupies the White House, how do we ensure that the powers that are available to him, someday her, are not used to unwind our democracy, right? Not used to really kind of degrade the polity. That's the two-pronged test, right? That's what any reform we want to think about has to satisfy those two things. It's not about, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It's like there's two questions you should be asking yourself with regard to each one. So, we've got a long list, Sadia. How far can I go? So,
I know.
Okay, let me say.
Say what you need to say, and then
one expansion and a couple of contractions.
Done. Let's do it.
Okay, one expansion, and it's the only one that we identify, but it's an important one. It's a big one, which is to expand the president's agenda-setting power in Congress. that what we propose is that the president be empowered to propose a bill that he can introduce to Congress that legislators then are forced to vote on within a set period of time on an up or down basis. They don't get to introduce amendments. They don't get to lard up the president's initiative with all kinds of carve-outs and exceptions and goodies for the organized interest back home to make it politically palatable. They don't have to support it. They can kill it, but they got to vote on it. Mm-hmm. And so that's a way to kind of structure, to leverage the kind of perspective that presidents stand to offer, and thereby structure debates that frankly are not happening within Congress, that are true to the challenges that we as a country face. That's in the service of leveraging the promise. Lots of reasons for fear. Presidents can make a mess out of the bureaucracy by politicizing it. And we've seen that, frankly, across lots of presidents in the modern era. It's really picked up several ratchets with the current president. And there's been a bunch of research done by political scientists who show that there are these trade-offs between increasing reliance on political appointments and decreasing competence within the bureaucracies where those appointments are made. And so on the one hand, it's like that's a power that actually degrades competence on the one hand. And when you have a demagogue in office, you can expect him, again, someday her, to exercise those powers in the service of plugging in his cronies and shoring up his base of power and using it for anti-democratic ends. So reduce the level of the politicization of the bureaucracy. Let me throw out a couple more. Increase the independence of the Justice Department and reduce the opportunities for political meddling of the Justice Department and intelligence agencies. We ought to altogether get rid of the pardon power, which is used, we see, it has nothing to do with effective government. And you see that when a demagogue occupies the office or a populist occupies the office, it's used for political stunts. We just saw one last night in order to shore up his base, not to attend to problems, but in order to feather his nest. Do we want to say, but you also asked, you see I'm going on too long, but you also asked about like which one is most politically salient.
At this moment, yes. At
this moment. So the one area where I think we could make progress, that's another check on the presidency, has to do with emergency powers. Mm-hmm. So presidents have vast authority to exercise these unilateral powers as they see fit, but they can also declare emergencies, whatever they like, and in declaring emergencies, lay claim to new powers, which Trump has done in waging a trade war against China and in building the wall on our southern border. And Congress, for institutional reasons of its own, some of which are partisan, many of which are just embedded into the logic of the institution itself, rarely gets its act together and to say, pass a law that says, no, this isn't an emergency, and to formally retract those powers. But what you could do, what we should do, is require a president, anytime he announces a national emergency, to then go before Congress and secure an authorization within a set period of time. It could be 15 days, it could be 30 days. There's reason for flexibility here, but you've got to go and get that authorization. And if you fail to get it, then the emergency declaration promptly lapses, and whatever powers that the president laid claim to are lifted. And you could also say, having gotten the authorization, you have to get it reauthorized at regular intervals going forward. This would strengthen checks, important checks on the president's unilateral powers, encourage congressional involvement in these deliberations, and would be healthy for our democracy and wouldn't come at the cost of a less effective government. It would be about forcing legislators who often want to hide under a rock and avoid responsibility to come forward and to own up and to say, yep, there is an emergency here, and I stand with the president in his effort to address it, or not. That would be healthy. And it's something which in the aftermath of this presidency, I think there's an appetite for, certainly among Democrats and among certain segments of the Republican Party.
So I'm going to pause here for a second, Will, because we're getting some pushback on an earlier claim that you had made about populism.
Oh, good.
And this is coming from Caesar, who asks, is populism always bad? Is it always a threat to democracy? Aren't there ways in which populism is a corrective to a liberal democracy? Do you think there's room for an inclusionary and democratic populism, or does it always have to be something that's not that's anti-democratic?
Yeah, so we do not have a long list of examples of populists within the United States or around the globe that, when they rose to power and governed, enriched their democracy, enhanced their democracy. Now, to be clear, what populists can do, that initial critique of a political order can be generative, right? The initial move can be one that points to profound and systemic harms caused by a governing regime, and that can be productive and constructive. There's the possibility, it opens up the possibility, at least, for somebody to come forward and to say, these people have been ignored and they ought to be brought into the polity, and their interests ought to be attended to. The thing is that the ploy that the populace, as I've defined it, that the populace makes, is one, again, where there's nothing but wreckage. He speaks, again, in totally undifferentiated terms about the catastrophe that is the political order, and so that the only available solution is to vest hopes and aspirations in him, the individual, or her, the individual, not to set to work and rolling up their sleeves and saying, let's reconstitute this political order. Like, let's set it right. And for this reason, I don't think Bernie Sanders, for one, is a populist. Bernie Sanders offers a big critique, but Bernie Sanders doesn't say, vest all your hopes and aspirations in me, right? What Bernie Sanders is poised to do is, were he to, assume power, he would have, I think all expectations are, he would have rolled up his sleeves and said, now we've got to dramatically reconstitute the political order. And so in that sense, as I've defined populists, whether it be a left-wing or right-wing populist, I don't see either on principle or frankly many historical examples in Europe, in Latin America, where we find most of the examples to turn to, some in Africa, hope that it's democracy enhancing.
Right. So a lot of political observers and several of our attendees today have recognized the damage that has been done to our institutions over the last several decades, but especially in the last 4 years. In the Q&A, I'm seeing some highlighted reforms that are coming through, and we've certainly heard of others as well, limiting the role of money in politics, reducing polarization. How is what you and Terry are arguing about different from those sort of existing reforms in the democracy reform space?
Yeah, golly. I mean, like let us first postulate that, right, our government generally is in trouble, our democracy is in trouble, and there's no one solution, right? There's no magic bullet that's going to set things right. We think that presidents are the linchpins of effective government, just as they represent very real threats. And so we want to focus on a set of reforms that have to do with altering the powers that are given to presidents, reshaping the nature of presidential congressional relations, presidential relations with the administrative state. But that's not to say that there aren't additional layers of harm done by, say, the polarization of the two major parties or the rise of money in politics. And the work of rebuilding our government and standing up for and nurturing our democracy is work that's going to have to be done on lots of fronts. What I would say, though, is that the kinds of reforms that Terry and I are talking about have to do with matters of institutional design. I mean, they're embedded in the very structure of Congress, in the very structure of the presidency. They're not recent political developments that, for instance, have to do with the fact that the Republican Party is significantly more conservative today than it was in the early 1970s, and the Democratic Party is somewhat more liberal than it was in the 1970s, and that creates a kind of gridlock and partisan posturing and introduces a variety of pathologies. Those are real, right? Those present real challenges, and we've got to find a way to get these two parties to speak to one another productively. And thus far, I think in the main, we're failing. But even if you get rid of polarization, and even if you get rid of money in politics, you're still going to have a Congress that consists of 535 voting members that have all kinds of institutional reasons to pay attention to their organized interests back home. And that trying to solve the kinds of complex national and international problems that stand before this country will not do when we want to find kind of leadership to meet those challenges. That's not to say that we should shut down Congress. That's not my argument, right? It's to say that presidents should be included among the agenda setters. We need to find ways of leveraging the unique perspective that presidents have if we're going to meet these profound challenges. And that, again, so that's embedded in the institutions, embedded in, and is born of the Constitution in the way that money in politics and polarization is not.
I'm surprised you haven't brought it up yet, so I'm just going to ask you about it. You argue that we need another progressive movement devoted to institutional change and political rejuvenation. This is an argument that you and Terry have carried in this book, and you've also mentioned elsewhere. Our center, the Center for Effective Government, is dedicated to this space as well. How do you see the work that we're doing at the center and the work that you're spearheading on the scholarship side serving most effectively in this space?
Yeah, I mean, when you reflect back on American political history and try to think of moments when we as a country took stock of the capacity of our institutions to solve problems, to try to build a more modern, more effective government, one not that, one where we don't simply rely upon the handiwork of our nation's founders and instead own the challenges that we face and try to reconstitute our institutions so that we can solve problems.
Right.
We don't have many examples of this happening over a sustained period of time. There are moments, usually in the aftermath of some kind of either illegal or highly controversial war or scandal. Think Watergate and Vietnam, and the kind of congressional resurgence that we saw in the early 1970s. The progressive period provides, I mean, that was over about a 30-year period in the late 19th century, early 20th century, where a whole host of people, some elected officials, journalists, academics, lawyers, people in business kind of gathered together and said, you know what, this political order that we've inherited isn't up to the task of meeting these challenges of industrialization or these challenges of immigration or these challenges that are presented to us associated with the emergence of the United States on the world stage. It's not up to the task. And we need to think about how do we not have a administrative state that's just filled with a bunch of hacks that wherein people appoint their political cronies and their political supporters to privileged positions so that they can draw a paycheck, but have a professional civil service, right? That's born of the progressive era. It played out over decades. And that kind of work, which is the kind of work of our center, is to try to figure out how do we bring people together to talk seriously about and get traction behind reforms that might make our government better, not in a liberal way or in a conservative way, right? But make it capable of meeting the kinds of challenges that stand before our country and that our people, that citizens expect action to occur on. And when action doesn't happen, right, that's where we end up where we are now, which is that you've got all kinds of folk who think, DC is sold out, bought and paid for, and corrupt to the core. And so let's turn to a populist because maybe he'll deliver us. Is to say, no, we need to do the hard work of saying, we care about this democracy. We care about the people who live within it. And we need to find a set of institutions that allow us to bridge our differences so that we can more effectively meet the challenges that stand before us. They did that in the progressive era. They tried to do that. They didn't get it all right. But that was sort of the center of the task that they assumed for themselves. And
my next question.
We want to resuscitate that.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've already started to talk about it, but the progressive movement was wonderful in many ways, but you talk about significant blinders that the movement had. And I remember when I was reading the book, I was thinking about this summer and the last several months that we've experienced. And I wonder if you might be willing to speak to some of the blinders that we might have in this moment as we're trying to have another progressive era, another progressive movement. What blinders are you thinking about, and do you think others should be concerned about as well?
So let us first recognize that there are profoundly ugly and disturbing strains that also ran through the progressive movement, like eugenics and racism was rampant in certain quarters. I would say more, in addition, look, to the extent that it was an elite-driven movement, any elite-driven movement can lose its way. And it can lose sight of the people that it ostensibly claims to be speaking on behalf of. And it can advance a set of reforms that are profoundly misguided, and not take adequate stock of its own. I mean, the blinder is a recognition that a failure to recognize that in fact you do have blinders, right? To build in opportunities for contested engagement, that you need to speak with people and engage people who look like and think, who look different from you and who think differently from you. Not so that you end up at this kind of, kind of tepid compromise, but so that you have a fuller and richer understanding about what the expectations are of a public of their government and about the limitations of whatever institutional reform that you want to advance. The progressives certainly had those limitations, and to the extent that they made headway on the problems that they were grappling with, they only went so far, and the world continued, and the world became more complex, and the challenges before the government became kind of even, I mean, we went from an industrialized country to a global economy, and all that that entails. And so the idea that now we can simply import what they did, okay, so the founders didn't have it, but the progressives had it, that's foolhardy. Right. And so how do we then generate this kind of conversation in a sustained way, in a meaningful way with people who care about our politics? And in a way that also is generative, where the conversation can lead to action and experimentation and learning and adaptation, right? Because whatever we roll out now, I mean, I gave you a set of reforms that Terry and I think would be great. We're missing something for sure, right? Where some, or there's some, if you mess with a system over here, it's going to have in some unintended consequence elsewhere. And you need to be able to see that fully and offer continual adaptation and change. So yes, so I think the political challenge is, how do we sustain that? How do we sustain that? And not just how do you jumpstart a willingness to adopt a batch of reforms, but how do you sustain, particularly when these conversations too often are elite-driven, continued conversation and critical reflection on institutional reform? It's hard to do, but it's vital.
Well, on that note, what is a dysfunction of our politics that keeps us from coming together in the service of effective government? And specifically thinking about the folks that are listening in tonight, graduate students, incoming students, alumni of the Harris School, what can they all do to make government more effective?
So look, let me say a few things, and then just stop me. Say, you've said enough, Howell, right? Right? But let me say a few things. One is that, particularly for the students who are coming to the Harris School and thinking that they want to, what concerns them is the state of education policy around the country. And they want to improve the learning and educational opportunities for people who are right now having a hard time of it for one reason or another. That to the extent that they can set their eyes on not just questions about pedagogy or curricular changes or what the optimal size of a classroom is, but to think about institutional reforms, to how we govern schools, to what powers we give to mayors versus school boards, to how the courts are involved in making decisions about what happens within schools. That this kind of, what do we call it? Policy entrepreneurship. This kind of leadership is needed if what we want to do is really change lives. We need to think about altering institutions. So part of it is an expansion of our imagination. It's not just, again, thinking about what the optimal policy is, it's thinking about how policy is made and implemented, and that we should set to work on changing how policy is made and implemented. I think that's part of it. But there are all kinds of things that get in the way of that. Worship of the Constitution, that's one. The fact that as soon as I say the words in institutional reform, right? People's eyes kind of glaze over a little bit. Like, what are you talking about? I'm not sure what that is. But when you talk about, right?
You're not selling it.
Yeah, I know. And yet it's so vital. It's so central, right? Yes. So I think part of it is training people's attention on the importance of the issue and getting them to think analytically about it.
Right.
One more, which is that there is a pathology in our politics, which is born in no small part of the polarization between the two parties, wherein each side says, look, I'm happy to give more power to a particular institution, whatever that might be, as long as one of my own occupies it, right? But as soon as somebody from the opposition party assumes that office, well, then I'm going to do everything I can to roll it back and to decry gross abuses of power left and right and to say, we got to shut it down. And that kind of argument isn't available to us in a democracy. There are losers in the aftermath of elections, and we have to live with the consequences of those losses and set to work on winning once again. But in a world in which I'm not willing to either vest or take away authority, my willingness is strictly a function of whether my expectations about whether or not I and people like me will hold power. It makes it awfully difficult when the parties are as polarized as they are and as equally balanced as they are. It's a combination of those two things to make headway on this set of reforms.
So I'm going to turn us towards the election that's coming up. What is it about this election that makes the stakes so high?
Well, we're given lots of reasons last week and this week about why they are. My own view is that they both are onto something right, which is that to my mind, the future of our democracy is in some ways on the ballot. If you believe that Trump is a populist and that and that populism is anti-democratic, and you're concerned about the state of our democracy, that 4 more years of a Trump administration is going to have profound implications for democratic norms and practices, about the meaning of what a congressional subpoena is, about the health and vitality of an independent press, and on and on the one hand. But I say on the other, if what you think is that if you're a Democrat or a liberal and you say, if we could just beat Trump and we can get Biden in office, then we're in the clear, then not so much, because if all that Biden does is say what were once conservative policies now will be liberal policies, but doesn't set to work on the kind of institutional rejuvenation and reform that we need in order to protect our democracy, we won't be making headway. But there's a shot there. There's an opportunity there for meaningful change. And so, there's so much is at stake: the health of our democracy, the future of the Republican Party, and I think more generally, the sentiments of the broader electorate about their government. And I don't mean whether they support or oppose vis-a-vis one policy or another. I mean their willingness to view the government as legitimate, to support and trust in the government, that the trend lines up until now have been pointing downwards, and they've been pointing downwards for some time. And I think this election will have consequences for the future trajectory of those trend lines. And if we get to a place where both the left and the right views the government as illegitimate and broken through and through to the core, we're going to be in a very difficult place to dig out of.
I've got a question from an audience member here, Will. Adam Nadar asks, a poll from CNN last week said that the most people voting for Biden were doing so because he's not Trump. Can we discuss the DNC and our process for selecting candidates? Each election, it seems like we have the wrong candidate or not the candidate that folks are most excited about. This is an audience question.
Yes, so we weight votes both in primaries and general elections. Each vote counts equally. We don't weight them according to the level of enthusiasm with which they're cast. And I think it is fair to say that the average level of enthusiasm cast for a Biden nomination was lower than that cast for a Warren nomination or a Sanders nomination in the primary season. They're treated equally. But look, I think part of what is going on here is a calculation on the part of some voters about who stands the best chance of actually beating Trump. So there's a set of calculations that go into that. There also is a recognition, and there's actually a fair bit of political science done on this, that more moderate candidates do better in general elections than do more extreme candidates. This has been, I mean, the best work that's been done on this shows that moderation, there are electoral gains to be had associated with moderation. And then the third thing that I would say is that we're seeing this in the competing, portraits of Biden last week and this week, is that for many Americans, they see Biden as somebody who is experienced and trustworthy and the right antidote to a Trump presidency. What we don't want to do is counteract a populist revolution with a far left revolution a la Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren. What we need is some sort of stability and some attention to normalcy. Now, this isn't me arguing that is in fact what we need. Those views resonated among portions of the Democratic base and contributed to why Biden got the nomination. I'll say, if all that Biden does is say, I'm elected, now I'm not going to send out those tweets and I'm going to speak like a president, and so we're good.
You mean Trump?
What?
Biden sending out tweets or Trump sending out tweets?
No, if all that Biden does is say, I'm not going to send out those, I'm not going to behave the way that Trump behaved. Mm-hmm. So we're good. We are not good, right? A lot of work lies ahead. And so again, I mean, you asked early on, like, why did we write this book? In part, it was trying to speak to anybody who cares about our democracy. It was also an effort to try to speak to Democrats in particular, to say, you have a chance to make a difference here, but if all you do is, celebrate in the rapture of, defeating Trump and think you're in the clear, you're fooling yourself, because you're laying the groundwork. As long as those big systemic modern challenges persist and the government fails to address them, the groundwork will be laid for future Trumps and future populists.
So I have a question, Will, that kind of flips this a little bit. I'm hoping it came from a CLA fellow, because it sounds like a CLA fellow. Why does reform have to start at the top? What can local agencies, and what do local agencies have responsibility for in light of the rise of populism? How can we disentangle poor implementation of executive policy and procedure from the management of those funds at the ground level?
I totally agree. That's got to be a CLA question, because it's a great question. Mm-hmm. Right? And we should say CLA is the Civic Leadership Academy, and you and I run this program. We bring together 15 members of the nonprofit, 15 members of the government sector here in Chicago for 6 months. And these are these are people to believe in. These are people to get behind, who care deeply about this city of ours and try to make a difference. These are, it's one of our great joys to be able to work alongside these folks.
Really?
And why does it have to come from the top? It doesn't. I will say there's important pressure to be pushed on people on the top that comes from the bottom to pay attention to issues that aren't receiving attention. Just as there's all kinds of need for institutional reform within city and county agencies. And we talk about that in CLA. There's work to be done locally in order to address the challenges that Chicago faces. For sure, the idea that, our institutions are as they ought to be here in Chicago is foolhardy, right? There's a lot of work to be done here as well. Okay, but what motivates this book is paying attention to a set of big time issues like climate change, like immigration flows from the global south to the global north, that present profound challenges to governments. And there we need some national leadership. That's not to say that there aren't other issues where the impetus for change should be coming locally, and that we need to see bottom-up change, for sure. And that isn't to say that bottom-up change can't affect what goes on in the national government. But having written an awful lot about presidential powers, Terry and I both wanted to talk about how we might reconstitute the presidency. But that's not to the exclusion of all kinds of need for institutional change elsewhere in the national government and at the state and local level as well.
So we're at the 10-minute mark, Will.
Okay.
As kind of round out the conversation, I want to give you an opportunity to say something that you have not had the chance to say thus far. And then I've got a couple of closing questions for you.
Something that I haven't said thus far.
About the argument of the book that we have not quite gone into, or that you want to say a little bit more about.
You know, I would say one thing, which we didn't talk much about, but which is of a concern. And I mean, you asked earlier about impediments to institutional reform. And I think right now, and I'm going to say something which I don't mean to sound partisan, but it's just trying to take stock of the way things actually are. And the way things actually are is that the Republican Party right now, as the party of Trump, and as the institutional vehicle through which populism has taken hold in this country, the Republican Party members of the Republican Party are unlikely to be constructive partners in an endeavor to effect meaningful change in revamping the institutions in the service of a more effective government. That's not to say that there aren't individual Republicans who care deeply about political dysfunction and who would like to do something about it. So this is not, I'm not trying to cast a pall on all Republicans at all. But I think the kind of structure of the Republican Party, and to the extent that populism has taken hold of it, I would add it to the list of impediments for constructive change. In the past, when we think about major institutional reform, it's often been bipartisan in nature. Republicans and Democrats alike have gotten together and said, we need to do something about. And there are some opportunities for that now. Actually, again, I do think this emergency power stuff is one area in which you could get some Republicans to sign off on it. And even more if Biden becomes president. But when you think about kind of wholesale change, in trying to make for a more effective government, not necessarily a bigger government, but a more effective one, most of the action needs to come from the Democratic Party. I think that's just being politically realistic.
So a few days ago, we launched a new series out of the Center for Effective Government with the Washington Post Monkey Cage blog, which outlines specific reforms to Congress and the presidency. Can you speak a little bit about that? Because that seems so in the moment and leading up to the election. It's something that we wanted to really get out in front of folks. And I'm curious to hear from you, like which of those sort of reforms resonate with you? What are you thinking about when we launched this?
Yeah, so this has been a lot of both, it's been both gratifying and I think it's important work. What we've partnered with Protect Democracy, which is an advocacy group that has lots of lawyers and they spread out all over the country. They have assets that we don't have here at the University of Chicago. We have assets they don't have. And it's an effort to play a small part in, again, trying to seed a larger progressive movement to talk about, to think about institutional reform. So we invited a bunch of policy advocates and academics and lawyers to write essays that are being, as you said, published on the Monkey Cage blog of the Washington Post to talk about a particular reform or set of reforms that they think would help improve government when it comes to congressional presidential relations. And so we've had people write about emergency powers, congressional oversight of presidential war making, the development of expertise within, or the lack of expertise within Congress, and what kinds of institutional reforms might improve that. And changes to the legislative, so there's a big Supreme Court case, INS v. Chadha in the early 1980s that got rid of the legislative veto, which introduced all kinds of additional pathologies. And so we've got a great essay thinking about how we might revamp a number of kind of governing regimes between Congress and the president in the aftermath of that ruling, which we as a country haven't adequately attended to. So it's a whole collection of things. So, and Terry and I are writing one as well about agenda setting powers. So if I had to pick my favorite, that's the one, that's my favorite, right? But look, this is about bringing together people. We've got conservatives and Democrats alike coming together, writing about how we ought to revamp Congress, revamp the president, and importantly, revamp the relationship between the two so we can just have a better government. So we're doing that. These essays are coming out. We're going to try to bring them together to talk about these things. We've got plans afoot to gather when we finally can gather in person to try to think about and to expand the audience for these particular reforms. Again, it's about trying to breathe life into these this reform movement.
So I want to end on a positive note. What gives you hope as you think about institutional reform and where we're at in this upcoming election and the hundreds of students that are going to virtually walk through the halls of the Keller Center this year?
So when you talk about institutional reform, the first 60 to 90 seconds is tough to get through. But once you get past that and you engage people, particularly young people who, and I think there are an awful lot of them, who care deeply about this country and its direction and want to make a difference. They get that a whole lot is at stake in this election. And they get that the institutions that they inherited aren't working well. And they're open to the idea of thinking expansively about change and about paving a more productive way forward. So, I mean, like where I come away feeling energized, I feel energized when I engage with students. I feel energized each time after we have these meetings with our friends at the at CLA, the Civic Leadership Academy, people who've devoted their lives to this kind of work. We're trying to amplify voices and ideas, some of which are our own, others of which come from other people, in order to jumpstart a commitment and a sustained commitment to revitalizing our democracy. Crises, there's a million things to lament about crises, and we have crises. It's like a multi-dimensional set of crises that have landed upon us, but it also opens up opportunities. And I think there are a lot of people who want to take advantage of that opportunities to push forward and to be in conversation with them and to engage them and to be inspired by them. There's nothing better.
So we're just about wrapping up. President, populism, and the crisis of democracy. You can tell I took notes. You can find us at your local independent bookstore. If you're in Hyde Park, we recommend the Seminary Co-op. We have a CLA fellow from the Seminary Co-op, and Professor Howell serves on their board.
And it's the best bookstore in the country. It's just fantastic. Support the Seminary Co-op.
There you go, damn well is. But I'm going to leave the last question to Professor Austin Wright, who via Twitter asked you a question yesterday.
Oh.
Will, do you actually love Taco Bell this much?
I actually do. I love everything on the Taco Bell menu. And anybody who wants to go to Taco Bell, there's one opening on 53rd, and I just learned that it's not just a Taco Bell, it's a cantina. I mean, I think we can order beer there. It's unbelievable. And I would at any time, happily walk into a Taco Bell and have 3 random items picked for me and served. I would absolutely delight eating whatever it is.
I feel like this is a challenge you're putting forth to our incoming students.
Come, we shall dine together.
I recommend they all take you up on it. If you'd all like to follow our work with the Center for Effective Government, we've got a website, effectivegov.uchicago.edu. You can follow Will on Twitter at Prof. Will Howell, and I think Anna's dropping a couple other links in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us. Will, it was such a pleasure to chat with you, as always.
It's great to talk to you too, Sadia. This is work that we do together, and I think we're both doing our best to try to amplify these themes. It's such an honor and pleasure to work with you.
Thank you. And to everyone listening in, thank you and good night. This is great.